welcome to World of a Keyblend, Understanding African Spirituality. I am the Seeker. I am the Malakio. I'm seeker of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And as I'm not the expert, but as I learn and understand, I come and I share it with you. We take an academic approach to understanding African spirituality at this particular time. So we're diving into the written word of other individuals' study to get a good look at this. Um, if we have 4,200 different cultures on the motherland, then that means we definitely have 42 different ways to view African spirituality. And so this is what we understand, this is what we know, and so we seek to take a look at someone who has a sympathetic eye on looking at our history and our past, because we know if we look at our history and our past and how we view things with the eyes of our oppressor, we don't come up in a good likeness. When we've known, if you came coming from African history class a few clicks ago, you would realize that everything was fashioned behind African spirituality and African history and African influence. And so we want to be aware of that as we seek an academic understanding. And so, with this academic understanding, when I was coming up in my community, this was one of the books that we had to actually take a look at to begin to incorporate African religions and philosophies into a modern life. And so this is the book that we will be looking at right now. We're on chapter 9, and we'll come up to that. And for those who are seeking to understand, so where did I get my start from? That's where I got my start from. Um, Learning and taking a look at the book, we know we're going to have a review of the chapters in which we've covered. Chapters in which we've covered, and some of the first things that we took a look at was monotheism, polytheism, and animism, which is again, and we want to always do a review for those who are watching for the first time. I don't want you to come in the middle of a good subject and not have the foundation of which that subject came out of. Because when you read a book, one chapter connects to the second, connects to the second, connects to the second, unless you're reading a book of short stories. This is not a book of short stories, so we try to get a good view of what the writer and the researcher was trying to implement. So in the book, we took a look. He said that he came across three areas of faith, which is the monotheism, which is one God; polytheism, multiple gods; animism, multiple gods, multiple spirits, and a lot of different levels of consciousness. And so those are the three things in there. He said also African spirituality has four areas of foundation: the Mumtu, which is um, the creation of everything of intelligence. Muntu is the creation of everything of intelligence. The Kintu is everything that the people, the items of intelligence has dominion over. So what's in there? So there'll be trees, it'd be water, it will be earth and soil. That's the kintu. Certain animals, but they said certain animals also have a level of consciousness. So you break that down: insects, food. Then you have the hantu, which is the time. Time is deeply important, deeply important, deeply important to African spirituality. And time is broken down into two. The hantu is broken down into two levels, which is the sasa and the zamani. And throughout the entire book, he mentions the sasa and the zumani. And so understanding that the sasa is the present date, the zamani is the past. And in African spirituality, Africans are moving toward not their future, moving toward their history, their past. So there's nothing more important to in within African spirituality than the sasa, that moment you live in at the time. Not what you, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or putting it off. Yeah, they're not necessarily big on procrastination, because procrastination is a disservice to God and disservice to the time that God gave. So the sasa, zumani, the more sasa you have, the more wisdom you have, because you've had more time. You have a longer sense of Zumani, which is the place where you pull your wisdom and understanding from. And then the third part of that uh, four-part section of African spirituality is the Kantu, and the Kantu is the modality of how they express it. And the chapters go in and on all four of these levels, and it breaks down all four of the levels so that we get a clear, more deeper understanding of the basic of African spirituality. So is there something that I have, that I follow, that I'm a part of? Absolutely. um, not everyone in my church has this particular African tradition. So we might have individuals who have connected to other African traditions along with the Christian tradition in which we have. So why? Because we're Africans. We could do it all because we invented it all. One love. I appreciate that. And so we dealt with the nature of God in African spirituality, and it claimed to be everything that we see modern today. God is all knowing, all seeing, and He's everywhere. That's is in a nutshell. And there's nothing higher than God. God gives, He has the first and last word. He's the Alpha and the Omega in African spirituality. And we know that African spirituality dates back beyond Christianity, dates back beyond Islam, because those two religions are the youngest form of ancient African wisdom. And it was what Europeans used to try to change us from who we are. But if we embrace Christianity in its purest form, coming out of African spirituality, knowing, understand the nature of God and how God works, we can't go wrong. And so that is important, why we have to take time to understand it. Then we talked about God at work, God in creation, God in terms of providing food, clothes, shelter, in terms of what He does for the earth, provide rain, all the phenomena. In the African spirituality, we live in a religious universe. Everything is connected in the substance of God. Everything, heavens and earth, everything is in the palm of God's hands. And so we also stated that man only can understand the world through an Afrocentric point of view, putting him in the center of all things and making things so that he can understand it and how God is. So when I say put it in God, God doesn't have hands. God sees you. God doesn't have eyes. God hears you. God doesn't have ears. It's a spiritual entity that permeates the entire universe. It is in all things. So in African spirituality, there is nothing void of God. So in modern times, we talk about it, but in African spirituality, they live it. Because they sit down and say there's nothing void of God, but that I don't see you. We have a problem as a people manifesting our best moments in our sasa. I get asked a lot, how do you do what you do with the time schedule that you have? My best response is, how do you not? All I'm doing is adhering to the sasa and what God has called me to do. What do you adhere to? And a lot of people's response is self. Yeah. What I answer to is bigger than self. We also dealt with the issue of nature and God, and how everything is a reflection of the creator. Everything you see, and how things are, certain things are considered sacred: grass, trees, rocks, mountains, rivers, lakes, the versions of water, nature and God. And so the connection that they were able to see, that God is in everything and all things, animals and artifacts. A rock is sacred to some. Animals, there's certain people, where certain animals are sacred, and so water is definitely sacred. Rain is sacred. Thunder, lightning, God's justice, they say. It's a lot of things going on. And so also we dealt with the issue of worship, and that's sacrifices, that's the pouring of libations, that's meditation and prayer, um, being able to, that's African dance, music, the worship of God. And then they said we dealt with, in that one, where we have diviners. In our world, we call them ministers. They call them diviners, those who can speak with the spirit realm and in God, and talk about the spirit realm. We had one where we dealt with the issue of the African deities, you know, um, and the levels of reality in which we exist within, or Africans exist. We exist in spirit, where they said you have God, then you have the deities, then you have spirit, then you have the living. He called it, the writer John Mbiti called it the living dead, and the living dead are those ancestors who have not been passed away for the length of 5 generations. He said those are living dead because those ancestors are still accessible when we're creating altars and interacting with them, and asking them to take a word back to the Creator. When Jesus says in Christianity, he said, pray in my name, and I will make sure what you say gets to the Father. I'm going to prepare something for you. Why? Because I'm gonna work on your behalf, and I'm gonna get it to the Father. And so there are levels in African spirituality to these things and these people and these places. Now, one of the things I'm gonna get to, so now, because again, with the way this academic approach, there's not a lot of video, and maybe in other books and other scenarios, when we start looking at African sex, particular African sex, we can see there was a book that I found called African the Encyclopedia of African Spirituality, right? The Encyclopedia of African Spirituality. And so maybe in that book we can get to the point where you can get detailed information from that book. And so I did download it. I didn't get a chance to pull anything from it, but in today's thing, we're looking at chapter 19. Today's conversation about understanding African spirituality from the book. Let me pop it up so y'all can see it again if you're watching us for the first time. African Religions and Philosophies, the second edition by John S. Mbiti. Today we're dealing with the conversation we're on chapter 9, and this is the creation and the original state of man. The creation and the original state of man, which is basically Genesis, the coming or the beginning of something. Of course, here Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, which talks about creation. It talks about Adam and Eve. It talks about the fall of man, Cain and Abel, Noah, all what is considered sacred mythology, because you can't prove none of it. And we dealt with that in African history class as well as African spirituality class last week, when we did said that every religion has a area of sacred myth. Again, man can't remember what happened 3.75 million years when he got on earth versus the billions of years that earth has been alive. Man cannot remember. So what this is a conversation about the genesis of man. And please do not forget that even in as we are in modern time, and as we had siphoned European perspective of religion from a European society, uh, their view is uh, uh, anthropocentric. Now, even though African spirituality is also anthropocentric, the difference is Europeans put themselves as the center of the world. And African spirituality, they know that the center of the world is already in Africa. There's no question about that. They're not even arguing that fact that we are the first people of the planet. They don't even argue that fact. Why? Because this is what we know for millions and millions of thousands and thousands of years. We know that we are the creation of God, um, and that man was created by God. And so in African spirituality, there are so many pieces of art that we use to show what we believe in African spirituality in terms of the Genesis, right? And I'm gonna stop the thing from moving, right? And so and stop the video in the background from moving. And so we have those things that spark an understanding that man comes from God. So in African spirituality, again, we always say if there are 4,200 different tribes in Africa, there's 4,200 different views of African spirituality and how people define themselves unto God, not giving no one people's version uh, prominence over another. Where you have certain levels of Christianity. If you don't believe what Christians believe, then you go straight to hell. So that means you have all wisdom on the creator that built the whole universe? No. Because if that's the case, you can tell me, why do you think that you're still the only universe? And the more you learn that you understand, the more you realize that you don't know. And so it's hard for Christians to come back off of understanding of, unknowing the stuff that they know, because they hold it so sacred. Why? Because we are still an African people. And so everything is sacred to us, but we need to always check the foundation in which that is. And so in African spirituality, of course, they know that man was created by God. And some say, let me drop this. He didn't create, and in some instances they said, women came from man. Most of the time when we're saying man in the Bible outside of Genesis, most of the time they talk about man as in mankind. I don't know why I'm sitting so low in this one, right? I guess I didn't check this one. But we're talking about mankind. And so mankind meaning black man, black woman. And so there are some instances where they say, the woman was created out of man. Some say God did not create woman out of a rib of a man, because the man, don't have a missing rib. When he created man, he said, I need to create him someone to talk to, because he's always talking to me and I'm getting tired. There's really some stories, African mythology, where he said, let me give him someone that keeps his attention. Not only at those times where was in certain stories in certain places, they say, hold up, man and woman was created simultaneously as husband and wife. That opened my eyes. I don't want to get emotional. Man and woman was created simultaneously as husband and wife. They came together. They were already the institution of family mm, when they hit the earth. That was the most powerful story, and I didn't write down which tribes believe that, but that was one of the most powerful versions I've heard, because it doesn't make a man above a woman. And you know they say, well, oh, the woman gives birth, so the woman had to come first. It doesn't place the woman against the man. It placed God at the highest position, and he said, I'm gonna bless husband and wife with the earth. Wow. And so you understand why marriage is so sacred. God created us for each other to have dominion over the areas of African spirituality, right? And so everything and to enjoy the universe. But we're dealing with creation. We're dealing with creation first. Then some say, we'll go back to this, that man was created out of clay. What? African spirituality, ancient African spirituality that dates way beyond Christianity and Islam. They say that stories of for thousands and thousands of years that man was made out of clay. Now, how do you, according to their book or their philosophy, it said that the different colors of clay is the manifestation of the different races. When God said, well, I'm going to create this out of this clay and this out of this clay, and give them different languages and cultures. They said that's how that came about, the different hues of clay. Now, when we add science to spirituality, we understand that the DNA structure of an African genome type, or what we have in our cells, our DNA, our melanin, our cells, everything that makes us us. Within us, we have the ability to produce more variety of human beings than any other race, so all races came from African people, right? But then the myth of it, when they first started religion, before science was able to be imparted or have an influence of how we see ourselves. Now, the thing about spirituality and African spirituality or intellectual spirituality, instead of locking something down, as we began to grow as men, was always wise to learn something new. And if you learn something new that is proven, then evolve your thinking. Man was created from the dust, and from dust he returns. They always talk about that, right? And so that's the part of it, and that's how they got. And then what I wanted to say, that is, Africans say that that's why they call God the potter. Did you hear that? That's why they call God the potter, because God made man out of clay. And so that's a an ancient African saying. It's not a Christian saying. It's an ancient African saying that comes out of spirituality and culture of our people. So take away Christian saying, the potter's house, that's African. It shows you our level of influence in modern sense of spirituality, you know. And that was powerful. That was definitely powerful. In Angola, it says, there's a saying that man brought God forth from something called the tree of life. Mm, the tree of life. And that's, wherever Eden is, that's the tree of life. And so in the Christian Bible, they talk about the tree of knowledge. If I brought you out of a tree, don't eat from that tree. But they said we came from a tree, something that grows of life. That's beautiful. In the Nile Valley, it says man comes from the heavens or another world. Ain't that something? The heavens or another world. Now, in Islam, being another infant of ancient African spirituality, said that, man, the Africans came from another planet. They're looking for the sky for the wheel. My ancestors are going to come get me and raise me up. It's my time to go. When my spirit comes, the ancestors come and pick up my spirit and take me to where I'm supposed to be. I'm not familiar with Islam to the T like that, but we will be studying that as we start dealing with, we go down the line and taking a look at understanding African spirituality. Um, all of this is ancient and African wisdoms that we get and we develop. And so what we notice is that even in modern times, we are pulling from ancient wisdom. There is nothing new that Africans are learning other than the science of technology in terms of digital, but that comes from ancient African wisdom as well. The mathematics and science that is used to create today's modern society. But you see, the root of humanity comes from the spiritual awareness of an African people. How beautiful can you get with that? One of the things I wanted to share was in terms of creation, because you will always see uh, video, movies, or not, or illustrations. That's it. Illustrations of God and angels being in spirits depicted in a creation story as God being white, and He's creating a white man, and the things around God are white angels and spirits. Well, I appreciate the artists who sat down and said, we're going to be anthropocentric and paint ourselves in the image of the creation story, where God is not a man, God is a woman. See it? God has African ancestors and spirits, African spirits we'll call them, right? Because He's just created man. So those are African spirits around her. And she is now creating her in her image. How beautiful can you get? And so when I say we're waking up as a people, yeah, we're slowly waking up as a people when we can see ourselves in the deepest forms of spirituality. And that's important, that you see yourself, because in the development of spirituality, because again, looking at African history class, you got to understand what we created because of our understanding and wisdom of African spirituality. And because we had those, we got to understand how to use that again. A lot of people say that, Christianity didn't help us. I'm not going to say it didn't. I'm going to say we need to continue rewriting how we interpret it if we're going to continue to study it. Because to see ourselves as God's chosen, it amplifies our understanding of who he called us and created us to be, rather than going off of the imagination, because that's what it is when they give you false history of some other people. Now, in this next set where we talk, the concept in this book was then again moved to toward the uh, God's original provisions for man. And when I say man, I'm not talking about male. Man, I'm talking about the man and woman in connection. Because I'm going to rock with the fact that God created man and woman as husband and wife from the jump. In certain aspects, they say God created man because he wanted nature to have something to shine on. This was so beautiful. I got to put something here so that they can experience it. Yeah, ooh, nature is wonderful. Man came next. Some places said man came first and heaven, and God had to create the world, but God created. We know in science the world was created first for us to exist, and we know from African history class, or no, from a Keebland Inspirational Sunday, that the world was created in perfect mathematical genius. And we deal with the periodic table, and if anything was changed by 1/100th of the tenth, the world would no longer exist. So in the development of what we call the Garden of Eden, which means that there was, when man first created man and woman, husband and wife, together, unified on earth, African spirituality, it says that they lived in a place of privilege. The mankind, man and woman, had happiness. They had a childlike ignorance. They had immortality. They couldn't die. And if they did die by being adventurous or got really hurt, they could actually come back to life. And God provided all their necessities, all of their necessities. There was nothing that God did not give to the man in his original state of being. And in all African stories, dating back to the beginning of Africans telling stories, the history of living in a straight place of total abundance is in almost every African tale. Ain't that something? The Bible did not come up with this. The Bible is just a manifestation of old ancient wisdom created in their own stories to tell it anthropomorphically through their vision and their eyes and their imagination. Because we said it is sacred. Something's called sacred myths, things that we can't explain, but we're going to use it to explain it. These sacred stories. Um, it said God gave man everything: art, music, knowledge, everything, and even the understanding of how to make medicine. Even the understanding of how to make medicine. And when you take a look at, because I honestly have I have a something I call chronic, a COVID tonic. So I go outside. If I go to a place where I'm like, okay, um, it's too many people, or I don't know if anybody was compromised, but I went to a concert, and I left before I left the concert, I made this herbs that I know affect my organs a particular way, affect my bloodstream a particular way from inflammation, and affects my lungs a particular way, clears my respiratory system, purifies everything. And I do that. I make that, drink it. I go, I'm fine. I come back, make me another cup, drink it. I'm great. I'm great. I inhale, I boil certain herbs and inhale through my respiratory system to cleanse whatever germs I might have inhaled out there. That's how I'm defeating catching COVID, catching a cold. I don't really catch colds. Why? Because God taught man how to take the herbs and create medicine, natural and holistic medicine. The earth was made to sustain mankind. Again, we're talking about the perfect, the original provisions God made for the original man. And when we say man, we meaning mankind. Not just one man sitting on a planet, or a man and a woman sitting on a planet. No, they populated. And of course, in certain aspects, they said in African culture, yeah, you had to have those making. But then if you have, we don't know how the world was populated. I can't tell you, right? However, sacred myths can. give you an idea, right? And so we talk about mankind before they uh, separated from God. And that's the next phase of this. God's provided for man everything he needed up until the separation of God and man. And every African tale has a story of how God separated from man. And one story from the Ashanti said that man kept knocking on God for food. He kept knocking on at wherever God was. And I don't, again, anthropomorphic. That's not true. But, how do you knock for God? You might say prayer. You might yell. I don't know how. I don't know. But this is how they explained it. Man kept knocking toward God, asking for things. Can I have more? Can I have more? Can I have this? Can I? And God got tired of always being uh, asked, because at one point God was directly accessible to man. He wasn't a far off experience. It was that that direct experience. And God said, "Yeah, I'm gonna separate myself," because He didn't want to hear man always knocking at the door asking for something. And so He got to a point where now man has to speak via prayers, right? And so that's one story. Another story is that heaven and earth was disconnected accidentally by a hyena. Right? Is disconnected by a hyena. There was a rope that kept the heaven and earth together. A hyena did something and broke the heavens, and God drifted into an experience where man could not directly access the creator. And there is a plethora of stories talking about man doing something against God that causes separation. God gave man rules and regulations and told man not to break them. And this is ancient African stories, and they come in different ways. And man broke those rules that God gave. And for that, God said, now I will separate myself from you, and you will have a whole different level of existence. So the story of Adam and Eve is not a story separate from an African tale of man dishonoring the relationship that he had with the creator, which is our frailty. And so from that, and in all African history, they talk about that as it being deep into the Zamani, deep into the history of African spirituality. The perfect, the scenario where mankind lived in harmony with the creator and had instant, direct access to God. And in man's inability to follow instructions is what separate man from mankind, which is man and woman, from God. And so that's in every African tales, Zomani. Uh, One of the things that is not being said, and he said there was no place in African history where mankind can make amends for the separation from that perfect original state. There was no way that you can get forgiveness from God to get us back to that original state of being where God is physically connected. We are immortal. There's no place that, or no ministry, or no story where they can undo the disconnection from God. So in now, in African spirituality, after that disconnect from the history of it all, because that's so far in the Zamani, and if there is, a story, yeah, there's no story, so it's not even if there is a story. But now, God only appears in the man's current time, the sasa, the now, when the man cries out for God, or the man cries out for a need for God. That is the level of communication. So when we deal with that, we deal with meditation, we deal with prayer, we deal with yoga, tai chi, and movements and breathing. We deal with that. It's a God. It's a, in Christianity they say, when you've done the least of things, you know, to least of you, you've done for me. So relationships. So how do we get close to the Creator? Is our direct encounters. But God appears when He hears His most precious creation call Him. That's African spirituality. So understand how they feel about prayer and faith and ritual, ritualizing and calling ancestors. It's all relationship. So there is nothing new in this section of African spirituality that is not in modern civilization's version of spirituality or religion. We've had these concepts at the center of our being from the beginning of our time. And so let us not run from understanding African spirituality, but let's take time to continue embracing our origin, that we are a direct manifestation of divine thought, for which is God. And we are able to access that divine manifestation. We may not be able to get back to our original state of being, but we definitely can get to the point where we are surrendering to the Creator and we cry out. God hears, and He then appears within us and around us mystically. One love.